All right, I'm Chris Hayes, host of All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC. I'm here with Bradley Whitford and Reed Hundt. It's great to have you gentlemen here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, Bradley. Let me start with you. Why are you here?
What
are you doing?
Why am I here?
What are you doing in Brooklyn?
I call it celebrity lubrication. No, I'm here as somebody who worked on environmental issues for a long time. I've tried to use the ridiculous amount of attention that I get for what I do to spotlight issues that I care about. I'm here because I'm a father. I'm here because my mom read Silent Spring to me when I was very young and was an activist.
Wait, there's like
scary.
a bedtime tale?
Yeah. She scared me, and that's why I'm here today.
Will you tell me, so one of the things I think that's a challenge with this issue particularly, right, is that there's lots of people who have great politics, or and they care a lot about a bunch of issues, and if you said to them, you walk up to them and say, we're putting all this carbon in the atmosphere, and they'll say yes, and then they'll say, but then when they think about the thing that they really, really care about, it's X, Y, or Z. Like for you, describe to me how you got here.
I think it goes to a deeper problem with conducting public discourse on the same mechanism that we entertain ourselves. I think a big problem in getting the message about global warming out there is that it's not good TV. Watching a glacier melt.
Don't I know it?
Yeah, and it's a tough, big issue that's very hard to focus on in a visual medium, and I think that's part of what's tricky about it.
Reed, you are working on the sort of green investment space. First of all, tell me, we just saw Mr. Vice President give that sort of talk about what's happening in China. What are the market signals that sort of global investment financial markets are sending about future expectations for renewable energy?
So all markets change if something faster, better, cheaper shows up. The thing that has to show up faster is the move to the new power platform, because we can't let the climate change catastrophe grow to any greater dimensions. But it has to be better. People have to feel they're getting a good deal from clean energy, and that means it has to be cheaper than carbon-based energy, than coal-based energy. So when Al was talking about the battle in China, he's talking about the battle between one business that owns a coal mine or a coal-fired boiler versus somebody else that's trying to build a solar plant of some particular kind. These are business battles. We know the side that has to win. It has to be the clean energy business that beats the carbon energy business. And so all around the world, investors are looking to see who's winning in that particular battle. The good news, the reason for hope, is that the clean energy businesses, after many, many years, are actually starting to win state by state, country by country, region by region.
What does that mean win in, let's focus on the US for a moment, because I think there's a big difference between what's happening domestically, what's happening in China, and then what's happening in sort of the global south outside of China. There's sort of, right? So in the US, when you mean win, what does win mean?
So win, an example of winning is a solar company that's putting rooftop solar, installing panels on roofs. The growth rate of rooftop solar now is about the same as the growth rate of the internet in the early 1990s when Al Gore was the vice president. We know who ultimately won. The internet won. But in 1993, when Al became the vice president, internet access was 3%. It began to double every year, every 18 months. That's winning for the internet, and that's winning for solar installs on roofs. You can tell a very similar story about wind. You can tell a very similar story, although it's really, really tiny right now, about electric vehicles in California.
I live in California, and I was just going to say that, it feels to me it's not just the environmentalists who are driving the electric cars. It feels like it's hit a critical popular mass where the options are there and people are using them. It seems to me.
Bradley's exactly right. California, which is an economy bigger than France's, is the single cleanest big economy in the entire world.
Right. And California's been very active with the cap and trade, and Schwarzenegger actually was really great on this issue.
And one of the lessons that California is, and again, California hasn't done, has done better than every other state, and not anywhere near what we would need to do in the
Right.
in the short term, right? So but one of the lessons of California is all of the dire warnings about what will happen to our economy and our lifestyle and everything if we put a price on carbon, or if we start to demand higher fuel efficiency. In California,
Absolutely.
you aren't living in a dystopia.
The opposite has happened. The economy is in much better shape than it was before these programs were in place. So it does put the lie to the false choice between being environmentally responsible and being economically successful.
Let me tell you another good thing about California, because it's another sign of hope. 2 weeks ago, Governor Jerry Brown decided to create, with his iBank, an infrastructure bank, a division called a Green Bank that will loan money for clean energy projects. This is a great way to keep the money flowing to build a new power platform. We should have had a national infrastructure bank in the United States. President Obama's been trying to get that, but as everybody knows, Congress doesn't pass things nowadays. But California has showed the way, and I believe all the other states are going to start to copy that.
What do you say to, there's a certain line of criticism that's come from certain political sectors towards the green energy field that is basically a welfare case, that it's basically crony capitalism, that it exists entirely on subsidies, on sweetheart deals, on tax incentives. And a lot of that, part of that is true insofar as, because we don't have a price on carbon, the way that we've dealt with it is on the subsidy side, right? We don't price carbon, those externalities are taken out of the price. And so the only thing we can do is, like in the state of Massachusetts, is create tax subsidies for solar installation, et cetera. But there's a certain kind of person that says, we are creating sort of this little crony world where connected people such as Reed Hundt or Al Gore can go around and make these sweetheart deals.
Well, for one thing, we're not talking about handouts. We're not talking about the government purchasing all of these new clean energy products. If you put solar panels on your roof, you sign a contract to pay for the solar electricity that's coming off the roof. When you're buying the electric vehicle, you're taking money out of your pocket to buy that electric vehicle. Now, the government does provide some capital in these projects, but we have to stop and think for a second. Who pays for roads? The government pays for roads. Who pays for dams? Who pays for almost all infrastructure? Some government support for major public projects is perfectly normal in every country. So a combination of some government money and tremendous amounts of private capital, that's what will build the new power platform.
So Bradley, part of the challenge here, as you said, right, is, and this has to do with the story of green investment, is like what the story of climate change is at this moment. And part of the problem is there is a sense in which one story you can tell, and it's a story I see a lot, right, which is the story of we're screwed panic. And that's a story that I think tends to be enervating to people.
Yeah, there is a sense that we're sort of hypnotized by complexity into a kind of apathetic inertia, because it's a very complicated issue, and there's a sense that there's nothing we can do, and I think that's why this event is so important, is to show that the ozone layer was at one point a very complicated, unsolvable issue, and the science came together, and we were able to deal with it. It's a very important thing for me. I want my kids to witness and understand that no matter how complex a problem is, with the will and the imagination, that we can deal with it. One of the most upsetting things to me is that the political football that the environment didn't used to be. What happened to cap and trade, which was initially a Bush,
right?
Daddy Bush, right?
Yep.
and you think when I was growing up, there was Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and Nixon, looks like Abby Hoffman now.
Right.
And I think it's important to make this, to get this out of the political football arena. In California, again, it was really a bipartisan effort that made progress.
Do you think there's any, what Bradley's saying about the way in which the issue's been polarized recently? One of the things I think that's happened, and partly it relates to what's happening in financial markets and green investment, is basically we've all just thrown up our hands on the political side, because in what universe are you going to get 60 Senate votes for anything that would actually make a difference on carbon? That just seems implausible. And so now all the eggs are in the basket of, can the engineers who engineer windmills and solar, really, that's how I feel. I personally, as someone who studies politics and reports on it, it's just this small group of engineers that I'm basically hoping can figure it out in time.
So here's some good news. In the federal system in the United States, we have lots of governments. So when Washington decides that it's not going to do anything, we have state governments that are as big as many countries, and their governors take leadership. So not only Jerry Brown in California, but Andrew Cuomo in New York, Governor Malloy in Connecticut, soon to be reelected Governor Dayton in Minnesota, the governor in Vermont. All these governors right now are creating green banks that are going to provide low-cost capital to clean energy projects. This happens a lot. When Washington decides to not live up to the standards we expect, then the governors take over and start building the new
So then the big
economies.
question becomes, in the absence of a price on carbon, which it's hard to see a statutory price on carbon. You can maybe get a kind of backdoor price on carbon through some of the EPA regulation on the coal front. But in the absence of a price on carbon, can you scale to where you need to be just purely through market help on the kind of subsidy investment side?
You can, but there is a battle that has to be won. This is a real serious business battle. The incumbents, the people that have built their businesses on the backs of coal and other carbon fuels, they don't want to see this disruption. They don't want to see clean energy come in and take the place of carbon energy in the marketplace. So you do have, for example, industries in Florida that are saying it ought to be against the law to put solar panels on the roof of your house. Now, people in America ought to say, hey, wait a minute, that's my house, and if I want to put solar panels on the top of it, I ought to have a right to do that. That's an issue in the Florida governor's race right now.
You're seeing also this attempt in certain states to require solar users to essentially pay a fee, a tax on solar.
Another example.
In Oklahoma, they passed this in Oklahoma. In Kansas, they defeated it. But this would essentially end up, you've installed solar and the utilities are saying, well, you're using our grid, so you need to pay us.
As Justice Holmes said, the power to tax is the power to kill. And so the incumbents wish to kill the innovators in clean energy. This is a business battle where the power of regulation and law could be used for good or it could be used for ill.
I also just, as profoundly depressing as the political situation is, I think it's really important that people remain engaged, especially on this issue politically and nationally politically. Obviously, we'd be at a much different place in this country in terms of climate change. Had a certain guy won in 2000. Politics, it's matter. It's a very ugly point here, but a lot of the people who've been able to fight this issue, to fight progress on this issue, ironically, since they tend to be the small government people, act on the assumption that government is the way to create your moral vision. And I worry that the more progressive people often tend to not believe in government, ironically. And
or to say
when the system gets frustrated and they
right,
say
yes.
it's corrupt, I'm not going to participate. When the guys who are fighting progress on this issue, when they lose an election, start a think tank and run for the school board. And I think progressives in this country need to acknowledge that government is the way to create your moral vision, and we have to remain engaged.
Yeah, the carbon lobby is every day is 24 hours of work for the carbon lobby.
Right. They're working the levers there.
24 hours of unreality.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you see? So can you game out an inflection point, right, where basically what happens is the following? Because this is my own personal hope. If I try to think, okay, am I going to give my kids a world that's roughly inhabitable in its current shape? That basically on the technology and investment side, you get those kind of exponential curves, and that as that starts, that actually decreases the power of the incumbent markets, right? The incumbent producers, the utilities, carbon-based fuel sources, and that weakens their political power, and so you get this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, and then you get to the kind of scale. Because we shouldn't fool ourselves about what we're talking about. We need to leave 80% of the carbon-based fuel in the ground worldwide, right? So we need to get very far, very fast. Can you sketch that in your head?
So in the early 1990s, Bill Clinton becomes the president, Al Gore becomes the vice president, and they asked me to be the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. In that time period, almost nobody had a digital cell phone and almost nobody was on the internet. And all the telephone companies came to me and said, this is a bad idea, this mobile telephony, and it's a bad idea, this internet. It'll undermine all of the communications networks of the world. Today, not a single thing that you use to communicate would work on one of those old networks.
So what?
The new technology.
So what's the lesson there? Okay, but it wasn't just the new technology, right? Because for years, AT&T and the Bells and Baby Bells waged these wars about attaching devices to your phone, right? They didn't want you to be able to attach a modem, right? I mean, if you didn't have the modem, you wouldn't have the internet. That had to be a regulatory ruling, a battle. As Bradley's saying, right, that was a governmental battle to be able to make it so that you can attach a modem to a phone and thus the internet. So what is your lesson about that? What made that possible from a regulatory perspective?
So a little known fact is that Al Gore had a team that assembled in his office in the West Wing. Bradley knows about the West Wing. You've staged that very office.
I pretended.
So Al had a team that met in the West Wing every week for a year straight and laid out a blueprint for the policies that would open the door to innovation. It's little known because most people correctly perceived that it was the technologies themselves that were changing the world, but the government in the Clinton administration welcomed all the new technologies. For example, Al had the idea not to tax e-commerce in order to give it a start in the marketplace. Today we call that Amazon. It's kind of a big deal. It's wrapped all around the world. There are many, many other examples. They involve details like let's not have any laws against the new technologies, in the same way that Florida needs to say, let's get rid of that law that bans solar panels on roofs. So once you create the welcoming environment with law and regulation, the technologies are going to win because they really are better and cheaper.
And then you get to a tipping point where it makes economic sense and the investment comes on its own without government.
That's right. And then all those guys over in Manhattan say, now we know where to put our money into the future.
What have you learned about storytelling from doing what you do?
I have really mixed feelings about the way we conduct public discourse, because things from my strange job, things as simple as it bothers me that the death penalty in politics is reserved not for horrific policy failing, but for being bad on TV. On the one hand, it worries me that stories matter so much that the thing that we worry about in the studio at Warner Brothers, how to tell a story, which seems to me a pretty shallow thing to have to worry about, is so important. But it is important. It is important to frame, to do things like to frame this story as something we can do something about, and show that progress is being made.
The hero can win in the end.
Yes.
Bradley Whitford and Reed Hundt, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
Really
you. My
appreciate it.
Be
pleasure.
with you.
Good to be with you.